shall we kick off? So welcome everybody. We're here to learn about concrete dreams, the rise and fall of Cumbernauld Town Centre, and we've got three talented people who are going to be talking about it today. There's writer Alison Irvine, photographer and filmmaker Chris Leslie, and illustrator Mitch Miller. And they've documented the history of the town centre and spent time interviewing Cumbernauld residents, past and present, collecting stories associated with the famous building and exploring perspectives and asking, save the town centre or demolish it? So, without further delay, I'd like to invite Chris Leslie to start off the lunchtime meeting. Thank you.
Hi everyone, thank you for having us this afternoon. Thank you for taking the time out. I guess first off we have to thank our funders, Creative Scotland and William Grant Foundation enabled this project to happen. So I'm 1/3 of Recollective. We work together on various projects around the urban environment on different things from townscape heritage to high-rise flats. We've worked together 10 years and we all do our own separate projects as well as this. So Cumbernauld Town Centre, which we'll talk about today, and the first kind of sales pitch here is about this limited edition book, which we'll send you links in the chat about. So it's taken us a long time to get this project off the ground, never mind get the book published. And I personally had avoided Cumbernauld. I should say as well, we're all based in Glasgow, so Cumbernauld a 10-15 minute drive away. So there's no excuse to avoid it, but then there's no excuse to be there. And that's part of the problem, really, with the demise of the town centre. But anyway, I knew it would be a difficult project for me to go and just not have a reason to take my camera. So I waited for a better reason. I waited for better timing. I waited for something to happen, something to change and a story to tell. And then in January 2021, I read online about the town centre being demolished, and I knew that kind of moment had arrived, basically, to tell this story. So myself personally, I've kind of vested interest in buildings being demolished. For 10 years, I documented much of the demolition of Glasgow's high-rise buildings, social high-rise buildings, in a book called Disappearing Glasgow. And in this period from 2017, from 2008 to 2017, the city demolished about 35% of its high-rise housing stock. And Glasgow is a city that was full of high-rise housing. So that was a major change to the skyline. So there was this kind of connection here with the idea of something being demolished. I knew this project wouldn't be the wrecking ball swinging into Cumbernauld Town Centre. We wouldn't capture that at this point, but that will come later. But I just knew it'd be a great story. You know, Cumbernauld is this idea of the once celebrated brutalist megastructure that then went on to win the dreaded Carbuncle Award, you know, Pluck on the Plinths Award twice. And it's been neglected, it's been debated for decades, everybody wanted it to go, it's an eyesore, etc., etc. So I was really kind of interested in telling that story, but I had to get Mitch and Alison on board. So I eventually kind of won them round with the idea of this is going to be a great project. This is an important part of the social history of Scotland, UK, even wider. And we seem to be on a winning streak. There was a lot of traction. People were interested in helping us with the project. Everything was going well. And then the building was listed by Historical Environment Scotland, or tried to be listed. And it all went a wee bit pear-shaped because it just became a very politically charged issue and we weren't able to kind of move forward. But anyway, 2 years later, we finally got funding and we got support letters from people involved in the local community that helped that, and we settled on this title, Concrete Dreams, with the idea of kind of documenting the rise and fall of the town centre. So where to begin? I'm going to click on my screen again. That'll hopefully move forward. Yeah, here we go. So where to begin? So it's important to start this point as well, as we all were very new to Cumbernauld. We very rarely, if at all, ventured inside it. We're a bit more we're a bit more acquainted with it now, but we're still, I mean, we still get lost. And that's one of the problems of the original megastructure design. But we're not, neither are we lovers or haters of brutalism. We're not from that kind of camp, if you like, but we just saw this project as a real kind of creative documentation and exploration of the town centre at this point in time through these stories of residents, past and present. And it's not just a critical time for the town centre, it's a critical time for Cumbernauld as a whole. Because if your town centre is going to be demolished, and the town centre, of course, was designed to be the heart of the town, then you have a problem, and then you have an issue, and then you have something that needs to kind of be discussed. So that was our idea. It was not just about the town centre, but it was really looking at the town centre, looking at the town, sorry, as a whole as well. So the early days of Town Centre, the rise of Cumbernauld Town Centre, very, very easy to tell that story, very visualised, because everybody's very keen to talk about it, romanticise about it. This was the good old days. This was when the town was it was a beating heart of the new town. People were proud of it, they were connected connected to it, sorry. And our first kind of stop was to kind of, start from there, start from the very, very beginning. And our first stop for research was through at the Motherwell North Lanarkshire Council archives, which have, it's like an Aladdin's cave of maps, plans, photos, brochures that are stored in a cupboard at the town centre. And they wheeled us out, they wheeled them out for us to kind of look at. And this photo here is the, you'll see them online. This shows the original megastructure on completion in this kind of grand battleship grey, very futuristic, very utopian idea. But how does that kind of compare now? Well, it's very different now today. Parts of it look run down. Parts of it are just empty. There's no one there. And parts of it look like this futuristic sci-fi film. You could argue 2001 Space Odyssey. If 2001 Space Odyssey was set in a kind of grey, wet day on a Monday afternoon in North Lanarkshire, then you've got your perfect film set. But, capturing the interiors and the building, the exteriors, it was relatively straightforward for me. So without a kind of human element, without a story or a connection, the images felt quite complete and quite cold also. And I think, to be honest, anyone who's interested in photography or these kind of brutalist structures, they're a breeze to photograph. They scream out to be photographed, and they are very, very easy to document in that way. But, the heart of this project and the accompanying book kind of goes far beyond this idea of architectural shots. This was a kind of opportunity for us to really document this time in Cumbernauld and kind of question what was kind of coming next. So my focus was in the idea of, pairing portraits of the town's residents, past and present, with these kind of landscape view of the town centre. And that was kind of my main approach, as well as shooting the whole building and capturing as much detail as I could, even from the air, even with a drone. But it was through these the residents' stories, memories, and opinions that I kind of wanted to kind of weave a deeper narrative about the space. John, pictured here, used to work for the Cumbernauld Development Corporation, and he witnessed the town centre being built. He now attends the town centre daily, not to go shopping, but to attend a community hub. There's a community hub, food pantry, food bank, and a community service that operates from the space that once was a Virgin Bank. And it's fascinating because a lot of the town centre retail is dying. We can see that everywhere. And a lot of these spaces have been turned into community facilities as well. And that's a real that's a reason for a lot of people to come to the town centre. And on the right-hand side, you see this, shopping centre, because retail is dead, right, across the UK. But John, laments these failed retail spaces to be used for something good and something worthwhile and not just for profit. And he also wants to question what comes next in the new of Cumbernauld. Are we going to be included in that? Because this is a temporary solution just now, So there was lots of kind of issues like that raised when we chatted to people. This is a guy, Bide, we met from the community hub as well, and he had only been in Cumbernauld for the past few months, been living in Cumbernauld. So he views the town centre with a complete fresh pair of eyes. He had missed the decades of arguments and debates about the state of it and about the idea of it winning all these terrible rewards and stuff. And he came from another country. He came from another culture. And he viewed the town centre, say, with these kind of, fresh pair of eyes, and he was in awe of the town centre. He thought it was absolutely wonderful and a place full of treasures, and kind of was questioning, why would you want to knock something like this down? Carol was a volunteer at the hub, and again, she had lived in Cumbernauld and witnessed the town centre and witnessed it being brought up. And when she was younger, there was she spoke about the excitement of the town centre of being something new, something unique, and something exciting. But like most of the people, she thinks those days are long gone now, and there's a need to knock it down and start all over again. But kind of key to Carol's point as well is whatever replaces it, it can't be just another town centre. It can't be like something else that you see everywhere else. It has to be special, because it was very special in the start. Moving on quickly, Kirkland's here, who works in the library. We spoke to Kirkland. He was great. He was once a kind of advocate to preserve the building. He was like, he works there. He grew up there, but he realises now it's way too late. And that was one of the key points that a lot of residents said. It's so far down the line of this path of, neglect, that demolition seems to be the only answer that's out there, that's on the table, really. But he, we interviewed him. He spoke about the idea. He said the fact that it's ugly to other people doesn't bother him. He loves its ugliness. He loved that kind of appeal to him. And he kind of personally thinks that he couldn't come from else rather than Cumbernauld, and this connects him with the town centre because of that kind of uniqueness. He liked that quirkiness of it, and that something different, something being different, because everything else today is just the same. Everything's the same. So Kirkland was, as I say, wanted to save it, but now realises it's too late. And that's what's key. And that's, I think, for a lot of the population of Cumbernauld, that seems to be the kind of key message. So for a lot of the kind of residents who we spoke to, most people tend to agree that it's kind of it's all but game over. There's nothing that can be done now. North Lanarkshire Council own the building. There's now a timeline for demolition. The majority of people and outsiders think the building's an eyesore and it's not fit for purpose. It's, its heydays are long gone. These ideas of what it was is in the past. But there was another viewpoint as well that we documented. There was a small group of people, of academics and architects, and some residents as well, who kind of stressed the importance of the building and stressed the importance of it being listed and being a part of the social history of this area of the country, and want to preserve it. So we spoke to Professor Miles Glendine, who's director of the Scottish Centre for Conservation Studies at Edinburgh University. He's also a huge advocate of Cumbernauld, huge knowledge on high rise and things like that. So to photograph him, but I knew photographing him wouldn't be enough. So we done a short film with Miles where he gave us a tour of the town centre. And we kind of said to Miles, let's keep it nice and short, let's keep it brief. And it was a 2 hour epic video. So I'm just going to end here with a short snippet from Miles, and just this kind of counter argument about how the building could be saved and what there kind of could be an option for it moving forward. So this just runs for 3 minutes. And if technology works with me, it should all play.
Coming to this corner of the town centre, we could really see it at its kind of the most surviving dramatic aspect of it. It's a lot of it's been messed around, bits have been stuck onto it, a big bit of it's been chopped off on the south side where the Antonine Centre's been built. But here you get, very definitely in full exposed glory, the general idea of it. There seems to be a proposal to do another Antonine Centre, basically to knock down this building and to build a second Antonine Centre, which poses the question: if the first one hasn't done very well, what's the point of doing it again? Could it possibly try something a bit different? The pro-development people have kind of done a lot of trying to whip up the kind of support within Cumbernauld and around Cumbernauld. I mean, how you actually define the local community in relation to a building like this that sits on its own in the middle of a sort of space. But you know, predictably, the consultation has shown most people say, oh yes, a monstrosity should be demolished. Now, obviously, partly some of that is still reflecting the old kind of like discourse of, oh, modern architecture is ugly and horrible and everybody hates it, like Prince Charles and so on. Part of it is also just the fact that the building has been allowed to get very dilapidated. And I mean, anybody looking at the state of, you know, the inside of it, or some of the original parts of it, or the upper levels and broken windows and so on, you know, people are not going to like it. And so if any, as with, it's the same sort of thing as with these housing regenerations, really very like the Wynford at the moment in Glasgow, to allow this area to run, these towers to run down. Would you like to have some nice new houses, you know, and because this is such a horrible area, you know. A large number of people have now started, you know, asking questions about this. As a sort of a Friends of Cumbernauld Town Centre group has been set up, who are, you know, asking awkward questions about, for example, the embodied carbon, you know, but given the huge solidity of this building, is it really sensible to knock down such a massive structure that could actually, in terms of, you know, retrofit and reusability, is hugely solid and can be reused, you know, under the original megastructure idea, to house a whole lot of new functions in it, while also going some way towards responding to the new interest in the more trendy interest, if you like, in brutalism and in you know, brutalist concrete architecture, possibly by reviving some of that aesthetic. But there are some similarities to the Wynford and to the issues of, you know, sustainability and embodied carbon, and just whether it's just sensible to squander something, an asset like this.
So I'll stop sharing and I'll pass you on to Alison, who's going to tell you a bit more about the project.
Great. Okay. Hi, everyone. So I'm Alison. So I'm the writer in Recollective, and I did the words, and there were thousands of words. We all interviewed over 50 people of all ages. Some had lived in Cumbernauld, some had moved away, some had moved to the new town as children. Some were living in Cumbernauld village before the new town was even built and watched it being built up around them. And some were teenagers. We interviewed some young people today. So, right. So, I'll just tell you a little bit about my research. I spent a lot of time talking with people, which is a lovely part of the job. I like a chat. And I'd ask their thoughts on Cumbernauld, their first memories, best memories, favourite places. What do they do as children, adults? How do they use the town centre now? Do they like it? And as Chris said, do they want to demolish it, or do they want to keep it? And how did we find people? Well, we had friends who knew people or were from Cumbernauld. We followed connections, we followed leads. I had a point of trying to follow up anyone that it was suggested that I speak to, because I kind of thought, you never know where that takes you. And the one thing about doing this kind of work is that you don't actually know what it's going to be until you've done your research, or until you get quite far along in the process. So it's quite nerve-wracking. So I'd always had a thought of, I'm just going to speak to everybody. And then there does come a point where you're like, okay, I need to start writing now. The people on the screen are some of the people that we spoke to. Michelle and Hannah are on the top left. Graham, who Chris mentioned, so did a lot of geography, but that was quite posing for a photo. And Ian was an expert on Cumbernauld, and he'd set up one of these Facebook groups that people share memories on, and that is an absolute treasure trove of information, like little snippets of memories. And he, in particular, and I think it's really important in this kind of work, is he was a good go-to person for me to ask questions to. And I used to say to him, "Oh, is this quite right, Ian?" And I showed him copies of my essays, and he gave me feedback on them. So it was really important to have to collaborate with people as well. So I would interview people, transcripts, and say, look, this is what you said to me, this is what I've got to work with, are you happy with it? And at that point, some people might have come back to me and said, oh, look, can you take that bit out? You know, I'd rather you didn't say that. Or mostly people said, yeah, fine, away you go. So that's what I did. I had the transcripts. And then these are just a few of the things that came up in our conversation. So people talked about the town hall discos and the CDC club, the Cumbernauld Development Corporation Club. They talked about the pubs and clubs. They talked about the penthouses. They talked about childhood memories of riding bikes on the deck outside Galbraith's and Presto's, which is no longer there. They talked about the Scan Bookshop, Mary's Market, an indoor market, the Eagle Hotel, the library. Everybody loved the library. All generations absolutely love the library. And then they talked about things like the buckets, which are placed around the town centre now to catch drips. And when we did the launch at the library a couple of weeks ago, I said, have I forgotten anything? And someone in the audience said, pigeons. So I put the pigeons down. I do actually mention the pigeons in one of the essays, but these were kind of the common talking points. And I thought you just might be interested to see some of the raw material that I had to work with. And I was really interested in that people had very similar things to say about their childhoods. So this was Carol, who you've seen the picture of her, and she was a child, moved to a brand new house from Dalmarnock in the East End of Glasgow. And she said, it was fabulous. We loved it. And as a child, when it was being built, we used to come up and go up onto the top floors, the top layer, because there's all these little tunnels, and we all used to play up there. That's what we did on a Saturday afternoon. My friends and I would all go up to this part of the top of the town centre and just play chases and just play up there. So that was Carol. And then Kirkland said something similar. So he said he grew up in the 1980s. He was a kid then. And he said the town centre was pretty much our play group back in the 80s and 90s. It was like a big play den. The town centre had a lot of space and a lot of corridors that led nowhere, and areas that had been left almost forgotten. And that's where all the kids just ran about running wild. And then we spoke to Eva, and she was 15 when we interviewed her, and she used to hang about the bus stations. And if there's two bus stations either side of dual carriageway in Cumbernauld Town Centre, and that's quite a bugbear of residents, because to get from one side of the town centre to the other, you have to go up through the building, across and down. It's really hard to navigate. But anyway, the kids used to just knock about there, and by Eva's admission, just kind of run amok. And they were a common theme, actually. A lot of older people mentioned the kids mucking about the bus stops. So Eva said, I used to hang about here when I was like 13 or 14. We would just come back whenever it was cold or there was nothing to do. Everybody knew everyone. It was sometimes a lot of people, maybe 20 or 30. There's like wee bits where the security can go through. You can sneak through there. So I just really like this kind of this theme of sneaking through in passageways and empty corridors, and everybody mentioned it. And then we also, Mitch and I did a workshop with some students at Our Ladies High in Cumbernauld, because I really wanted to speak to the young people. I thought it was really important to know what they thought about their town centre. And I was interested if they knew their town's history, and of course they did. They were really clued up about the ideals behind the new town. And we did a kind of sensory exercise, and I really liked what they came up with. So this was one student, Bria, and she said, I see the town centre in the long pathway leading up to the library. I hear the town centre in the chatting of people who are catching up with each other. I taste the town centre in blue bonbon sweets from the sweet shop stands. I feel the town centre in the pages of books from the library. So I tried to incorporate some of that in one of my essays. And so on to the essays. I had all this material. I had pages of transcripts. I had the common themes that had come out, and I had lots of people. So then I needed to make something, to actually write something. So I decided that the best way for me to do this was to write 4 non-fiction essays. And so my challenge was to incorporate all the stories and memories that have been told to me, along with facts about the building, but also to make the essays engaging and to kind of have a nice story arc and a structure. And often I find in this kind of work, you're told wee tiny stories, like little snippets from lots of different people, and it's working out how to make them universal, but also what story do you hang them on? And as Chris was saying, I just focused in on the people. So I focused in on one or two people who became the characters. And that's what I did. And the essay titles actually came from the words of the people that I'd interviewed. So this first one, Can You See It Coming Out of the Mist, was said to me by John. You can see in the picture, he's an architect, but he was a boy living in Cumbernauld Village when the town centre was being built. And he actually said that to me and Chris when he was having his picture taken. He said of the building today, he said, "Can you see it coming out of the mist?" And that essay's got most of the kind of the facts. That was quite a tricky one because I wanted to kind of talk about the ideology of behind the new town. And then it's lucky when I'm to have Chris's and Mitch's illustrations when I'm talking. The next essay is called Dropped from Outer Space. And that was what the town centre seemed like through the eyes of a boy who used to visit it with his mum. And this man ended up managing the town centre, so we had quite a lot to do with him. The next essay was called An Old Take on What Modern Was Going to Be. And they were the words of one of the students from Our Ladies. And I loved them because I thought they were just brutal, but yet really, really interesting. And then the last essay was called An Anywhere Place. And we interviewed Professor Karen Anderson. She's an architect. And again, like Chris was alluding to, she said that if the town centre is demolished, she didn't want what was to come in its place just to be ordinary. She said it needed to be befitting of the town's past and ideology and the aspirations behind the buildings. So she didn't want Cumbernauld to be an anywhere place. And that final essay looks at ideas of community and consultation and town planning. And again, it's centred around a person. It's centred around Carol, who volunteers at the hub. So I thought, to spare you listening to me read over Zoom for 5 minutes, I thought I'd I would record an excerpt from one of the essays. This is the Penthouses one, and you can see them just at the top left, the kind of yellowy building with the porthole window. So that's the Penthouses. It's the one Dropped from Outer Space. And Chris has kindly added some of his photography and Mitch's illustrations over the top. So you'll have an idea of what the Penthouses look like, but also an idea of Cumbernauld Town Centre as a whole throughout the ages. So I'm going to go to the next screen and attempt to play the video. The Penthouses are perhaps the most recognisable part of Cumbernauld Town Centre's megastructure. Yes, you'll be aware of the whole boxy concrete conglomerate with all its horizontal and vertical lines. You'll recognise the glass and the blue paint and the inside-outness of it all. But the train carriage-like part, with porthole windows which juts into the air and is supported, balanced seemingly, by one gallus shaft of concrete, that's the famous bit of Cumbernauld Town Centre. Check me out, it could be saying. Look what I can do. Still standing. In our interviews, the Penthouses were mentioned without fail. People talked of the parties, the glamour, the views, the proximity to the Falcon Bar, and of their aspirational quality. I really wanted to live in one of those, said Alison, who moved to Cumbernauld when she was a teenager. Being in the centre of it, so that you could essentially wander down to the library in your dressing gown if you really wanted to. The penthouse flats, 35 in total, were built for executives, town centre living right where the action was. If you lived in a penthouse flat, you lived above the shops, next to the purpose-built club, the Falcon, which became the Cumbernauld Development Corporation Club, or CDC Club for short, containing function hall, pool tables, darts, bowling and a bar. One main doorway led to two separate flats, one going up and one going down. So when you'd go through the front door and find 5 levels of kitchen, bathroom, living space and bedrooms. Ian had a friend who lived in number 2. Carol, for a reason she can no longer remember, missed out on going to a party in one of the flats and never saw inside them. We spoke to John, manager of the town centre. He hadn't been in his post for long when we first made contact.
North Lanarkshire Council had announced its intention to buy the town centre, and plans were being drawn up for the sale. John was in charge on behalf of the current owners and was responsible for running the shopping centre too. He was busy, harassed. I want to say beleaguered, but that would be untrue because he seemed to take a kind of relish in his job and thrive on all the buffeting and complaints and slings and arrows sent his way. Plus, he knew the town centre of old, and his job for him was a labour of love. He told us he used to come to the town centre as a child. This monster of a thing on stilts. It looked like somebody just dropped it from outer space. His mum would take him for a haircut and a lollipop and buy him a single afterwards from the record shop. John gave us several town centre tours over several months, along with commentary of what used to be where and when. It's a city, he told us. It's a town within a town, as he took us through tiled public concourses, past barber shops and banks, a sweet shop, jewellers' shops, and larger chains such as Farm Foods and Argos, while canned music played Mull of Kintyre. It's a sprawling spread of a shopping centre with near-empty escalators whirring when they're working. There's little hustle and bustle, but people are always on the move, passing through, not stopping, avoiding the many buckets placed in clumps and clusters on the floor. John took us onto the roof. Seagulls squawked overhead. It was a beautiful summer's day, and despite the wind, it was warm. John showed us the former CDC club and the town hall. We couldn't go inside because of the pigeons, which had created an atmosphere so toxic you needed special breathing apparatus. To get to the penthouses, John took us through a locked door and we walked up a red-floored ramp. I ran my hand along thick wooden window frames. John told me the ramps to the penthouses weren't covered when he used to come up them as a child. Open to the elements, he said, and told us his mother had a friend, a civil servant, who lived in one of the penthouses and they used to visit her. This was all open, in the middle of winter, windy, freezing cold. It was cold. My fingers were cold as I held my dictaphone towards him and followed his footsteps. John opened up one of the penthouse doors. It's difficult for someone who's never been in here before, who didn't see it before it changed into offices. It's hard to understand what it was actually like, he said. People were living in it, and it was a very nice place.
All right. Hi there. So I am Mitch Miller, the last, definitely least of Recollective's team. And yeah, as I say to my daughter, I draw the pictures, basically. Yeah, so I do a kind of illustration that I call dialectograms. And this is something I've sort of developed over the last 12 or so years as a way of engaging with primarily urban space, but also, you know, other types of spaces and other types of kind of environment. Most recently, a nature reserve in the north of Glasgow, and also working in Marseille, which was the most vitamin D rich project I've ever done. So it's been a kind of method that I've developed over time that is quite effective, I think, in showing different perspectives on the kind of environments that we live in and how people inhabit those, and also narrate those and tell stories about that. And this is, in a sense, why the three of us do work together so often, and do find that our approaches are quite effective in tandem, because we offer different ways, I think, of understanding the same space. You know, from the same material, we can look at very different look at it very differently, and find different kind of ways of expressing that. We actually, as Chris said, we've worked together for over 10 years, and we met at Red Road Flats, which was a big modernist housing development in the north of Glasgow, no longer here, quite famously and controversially demolished back in 2015. Was planned to be demolished at the 2014 Commonwealth Games, but a certain amount of common sense went out at that point. And we all had this task of, as within our different disciplines, of trying to capture something of this huge scheme. It had about 5,000 people lived there in its time, so a town in its own right, built in a steel-framed modernist style. And my job really was to try and look inside the tower blocks. So you've seen Chris's really fine panorama here of these blocks, and Chris did many things to capture the interior and exteriors of the buildings. But my job was to kind of go inside the buildings and try and find ways of graphically representing what you saw there, how people used those buildings, what they were doing within those kind of environments. And I developed out of that this idea of the dialectogram, which is a word I made up, to be clear, which kind of described this mixture of diagram, comic strip, ethnography, you name it, I sort of throw it in there and see if it all holds together. And by now it kind of has. This one here is of the Barrowland Ballroom, which was the project we did before this, and definitely a lot more drinking and backstage passes in that kind of situation, but a very similar kind of challenge for all of us. How do you capture a building in a sense? How do you actually get engaged with the building and how that building contains stories and allows stories to happen in a sense? And you can see here from the Barrowland, my solution is to borrow from architectural styles and cartography, but then mix that with elements of comics, elements of illustration and diagrams with, as you can see, quite a lot of writing. And one of the things that Alison and I have in common, for example, is we both are very dependent on interviewing and talking to people and getting those stories. Chris as well, of course, is always out there as well, interviewing and finding material for his films and multimedia. So with things like the Barrowland, I'm trying to sort of not just understand the place, and certainly for me in any of our projects, I'm the one looking in all the cupboards and down the weird kind of electrical outlets and so forth, because I need to know how the thing holds together. But also engaging with those stories as well and trying to find ways of graphically representing them. And you can see here, the closest I get to an action shot in any kind of stage of my life in the studio, drawing away, working from a range of different materials, whether it's sketches I've taken on site or photographs or, endless piles of transcripts. And you can just sort of see my transcript board up there, which gets really thick with sheets of paper by the end of a project. So when we came to Cumbernauld, when Chris gave us the talk and convinced us this would be a good idea, as we agreed, I had this really mixed feeling about it. On the one hand, I saw Cumbernauld and I saw immediately what Chris saw in terms of potential, the moment that was here in terms of looking at this icon of Scottish new towns and British new towns, of an architectural movement and all of the kind of complex stuff that we as a collective like to look at, actually. So that was all very evident. But for me, as someone who, is drawing the space in a very particular way, I was also very fearful, I'll be perfectly honest, because how do you capture something like this? How do you capture something as complex and varied as this? The first time I went there, we got lost. The second time, we also got lost. I went there just a couple of weeks ago and I still got lost. It's a complicated space. It's very hard to crack in the way that I have with others. I had done things in town centres before, but there's town centres and there's this place, right? This is Falkirk Town Centre with its steeple, right? And you might have heard of the Falkirk Kelpies and the wheel, but before that they had their steeple, and they're very proud of their steeple. And there's a precinct round there that is the centre of the town, and I did draw that in a project we all did together actually a few years ago. But as you can see, very different kettle of fish in many ways. It's a street, it's a flow of a street around a very simple building, as in just a square that goes up. So in terms of scale and magnitude, and I suppose I'm making excuses for myself here, is what I'm really doing. There was this sort of sense of, how do I get to grips with this? But what I did was, I did what I always do. I went deep into the sort of thinking behind the place and what could be found from that. And one thing that my approach does that kind of sits between Alison and Chris's approaches. So Chris, as he's capturing through light what is there, what's happening now, in a sense, and giving this really important testimony on that. Alison is able through, the power of just, non-fiction writing to go way back and to unravel quite deep stories. And I can sit kind of in between that. I'm trying to draw what's there, but I'm also able to go back in time in many ways. And so I kind of went back to the beginning of Cumbernauld to, Lord Reith, as you can see here, and his idea of Cumbernauld as an essay on civilization, or, the new town concept in general, this essay on civilization, an opportunity to design, evolve, and carry into execution for the benefit of coming generations. the mean for a happy and prosperous way of life. So in a sense, my first job was to go to the archives, and all of Cumbernauld kind of plans and concepts are there in this archive. So I went, talked to Vibeke, who was extremely helpful, and she said, "What do you want about Cumbernauld?" And I said everything, which I immediately regretted, because out came this trolley with like absolutely packed with stuff, and literally plans that stood almost as tall as me when they rolled up, and cracked as I opened them as well, in a very alarming way. But I started by getting into these plans and trying to understand sort of graphic thinking of the place. Because one thing as an illustrator that immediately impacted me when I saw Cumbernauld Town Centre properly, not passing underneath it in the car, but actually walking around it, was, in a sense, as with illustrators, we try to render reality. In a sense, we're trying to sort of find ways of taking that into a line and finding clearer ways of looking at it. And in a sense, Cumbernauld Town Centre just as an edifice, surpasses that. It looks like some giant has drawn it directly onto the Lanarkshire landscape. It's got all these lines and grids and so forth. So in a sense, the best I could do was try to kind of go along with that. So I was looking at the original plans, and you can see how faded some of them actually are now. And there was a lot of eye-watering kind of peering at the drawings, trying to understand them. A lot of wonderful moments, such as finding the kind of original concept drawings, these beautifully expressive freehand work by Geoffrey Copcutt, who was the architect at the time. For the comics nerd in me, and I think one thing to be very clear is I am basically a cartoonist with delusions of grandeur, right? I come from that world, and I saw this. I saw Mega City 1, 2000 AD. Chris mentioned Blade Runner 2001, which is more acceptable and kind of film cineastic, but I'll just go 2000 AD. Mega City 1, you can see here that original concept of big towers actually and walkways that then morphed into the town centre. And then looking at work by great architectural illustrators of our time, such as Mike Evans, who you may know, and if you don't know him personally, you've seen his work because he is one of the top illustrators. And in 1963, he conceived Cumbernauld in these beautifully elegant drawings that, in one way, he's kind of captured the time and the style and the aspiration behind Cumbernauld, the desire for it to be this aspirational town. But also, through that kind of blank face approach, he just allows you to put yourself in there as a person, and that's the kind of genius of how he drew. He used that kind of almost stickman blank canvas effect to allow you to see yourself in Cumbernauld as well. There, and in your nice jumper, as you can see with the gentleman in the front there, going to the supermarket, having a grand old time. And in terms of how I then tried to engage with that, well, I thought, well, actually looking at engaging with that style directly and how I then presented the material I got was one way. And you can see here from the dialectogram, which I'll show you in a minute, people escaping from Mike Evans' drawings into the kind of scheme itself, into the town centre itself and inhabiting it. And I sort of I paid homage to that style, I suppose is the polite way of putting it, throughout the drawing, because I felt it kind of got me in there. But as I said, as well as art, you can't go by archive alone, and a lot of it was really me wandering around, getting lost, tagging along with Chris and Alison, holding Chris's photographic equipment and talking to people, but also observing where I could. And a big part of that was actually observing outside the town centre as well, to understand its place in that ecosystem, to understand, for example, the often highly innovative housing that you will find around the town centre. Cumbernauld really is an amazing housing development that has about 80% of it stands the test of time really well, I think, but it's got this big controversy at its centre. I think that does block things out. So one thing I think all three of us wanted to do was to try and get beyond that controversy and find other ways of getting into it. But I did studies of the town centre as well, and you can see here again that the inherently graphic nature of the town centre, sometimes I could come up with some really quite nice drawings, as I did this, of the corridor going to the library, for example. But sometimes I was just desperately trying to capture what I could and understand the landscape. And here you can see a much messier, less impressive drawing of just, here's what everything's on the roof, here's how the roof kind of works, and trying to piece together the edifice as best I could. And yeah, some of this, I suppose, is stuff only I would understand. It's in my shorthand, and it's really about me piecing together the idea. But again, that emphasis was always to come back to the people. I mean, whatever the debates on places like Cumbernauld, it is a place that people inhabit, that use, and that is always the factor, I think, in all of our discussions about this, whether it's aesthetic or social or political. So I was there trying to capture people on the go, and did okay. Sometimes the bus stops were really good for that. So I hung out with all the bad kids and drew people as well as we went. And then we had lots of very strange moments. And I think, Alison and Chris will attest, just a lot of it was about walking around and getting a sense of it. And having these sort of strange encounters. This gentleman here at the bottom was a 90-second drawing, I think. It maybe took me 2 minutes. All I got of a man who stopped by as we were looking for a high school that we didn't realize had been demolished. And we were explaining that we thought this place was here and it's gone. He said, never go back. He says, that's where the trauma starts. And then off he walked into the distance like a character from Gregory's Girl, the famous film shot in Cumbernauld. Profound philosophical truth, and off he. So there was all sorts of moments like that we were trying to capture, as well as the debates and the controversy around the centre, the different views. And, I like this element here, which I included in the drawing, of two academics, very distinguished people, very high achievers, who both grew up in Cumbernauld, both came from that same loam, as it were, and have entirely different views on what should be done with that town centre and its value now, and very differing, opinions in many ways, but also, points of agreement. So I thought, and I think that's what fascinated us, was this, the same earth, the same kind of grounding for so many people, and then very different perspectives that they were finding on that. And what I'll do very quickly before I hand over to questions, because I realise we're at 20 past, is I will just stop this share and go to one last share and just show you the drawing that came from all of this. So you can sort of see a bit of it here. So yeah, I suppose I'm compensating for something in a lot of ways, because dialectograms are big. They're about the size of a table, and this is the size of 2 tables. So you could have Christmas dinner around this thing if you wanted to, and fall out with all your relatives. But yeah, the way the dialectogram kind of comes out is, as this big panel drawing that then, as we zoom in, as you can see, has architectural detail, but then social kind of narrative detail that is then wound into it. So we can look at things like what the kids get up to. We can visualize the penthouses as they are now, as in derelict, and you can see here some derelict penthouses, but also as they were, in their heyday. I did get the pigeons, actually. I always like drawing pigeons anyway. And everything from Gregory's Girl to walking to walkways and so forth is packed into this drawing that then tries to accompany and support what Alison and Chris have done. And that's our hope, I think, for this project, that we can't capture all of Cumbernauld. We can't be the final word in it, because it's not done. The town's going to continue, and the town centre isn't gone yet. There's still a lot to be decided and resolved with this demolition and what happens with it. But for our moment, for this time, hopefully we'll be able to offer a perspective of value and ways for people to get into that kind of new town, that setting, and understand some of what it's all about. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. That's quite a lot of information that you're conveying there, and you've gone far deeper than we would normally hear in a presentation from, say, a group of planners talking about a town centre. I think there'll be a lot of people who will be wanting to ask questions or make comments. And also, in just a moment, Gill Thompson, who I think Cumbernauld played a part in her formative years as an undergraduate. She's going to say something and make some questions and observations. But perhaps I could just ask a question to get the things going and give people a chance to think their own questions. Why do you work the way you do? So, I mean, you're bringing in filmmaking, photography, writing, dialectograms, sketches. There's that quote, what is it? Writing about music is like dancing about architecture. You're covering a lot of different mediums and a lot of different aspects. What drives you, and what benefits do you get, and what insight do you get from each other's perspectives?
Mitch?
You throw that over to me. Well, I think we're all going to try this answer, but I'll go first then. Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think that actually that last part of the question is really to me the one that resonates most, because I think we do get a lot from the way each other sees it. You know, when I hear Alison's words and I read what she's come up with, for example, I am seeing things in a way very differently to mine. And then Chris's photographs are just so good at capturing detail, but also just framing things for us. So I think for all of us, when we first met, back in the 2008, it was kind of, we all met individually and then kind of came together. We realized that first we had the same interest in our cities and how those cities were developed, and in the granular detail of that, you know, and that's what we were all trying to get at in our different ways. We shared a kind of sensibility and basic position on these things. And we were often doing very similar things in terms of collection, going out, seeing it for ourselves, talking to people for ourselves, spending time with people and going back to those conversations as well. But just very, very different ways of then making that public in a sense. And I think that allowed us to actually share a lot of work together, but also then be quite confident that there's our own way of actually, that artistic ego thing that we should all have, that own way of actually getting it out there and making it known. I don't know if you'd agree, Alison, Chris, but
I think you summed it up really well, Mitch. I think I do like the fact that we can say more, the three of us, with what we do, but yet it does have a sensibility that's the same, and I really like that. And I probably a lot of it comes down to we enjoy working with each other for a start, but also I do think I think we complement each other, and I guess the question is how and why, but I feel we do. Seems to work.
Yes, very quickly. I think as well, it's all projects that we do aren't the kind of sexiest of projects, I guess. But we're trying to kind of create a package of that work. Sometimes we do websites, sometimes we do film. And if we're lucky enough, we kind of get to do books. I keep plugging this book. But yeah, I think, yeah, it's this idea of presenting Cumbernauld Town Centre to other people, and the book becomes a lovely object, and Mitch's drawing becomes a lovely object that kind of tells a different story, rather than perhaps reading an academic report or book on Cumbernauld. We want to make it a visual and entertaining and engaging, and tell these kind of untold stories as well. And I should just add as well that Mitch's lovely dialectogram there is a full-size copy of it in the book, but that's my over.
Well, thank you very much. And now I think it's going to take a long time to absorb all of the information that you've given us here. So I'll be enthusiastically looking at the recording that goes up on Urban Nouse shortly. But anyway, next we have Gill Thompson, who is, I think, got a bit of a tale to tell.
Yes, I did start telling you it all, but I was educated in architecture in the early 70s in Sheffield, by a bunch of students who worked on new towns, and some of them had worked on Cumbernauld, and they'd also worked on the flats in Sheffield and stuff. And they were still raving on about it all. This was 73, 74. And a group of them had worked on Cumbernauld, which is how they got their jobs, I think. They were raving on about it. We weren't convinced, so we hired some minibuses and off we went as students, have a look. And we were absolutely mortified. We just thought it was in good shape then, but just the idea of having, no corner shops, just everyone having to go across this horrible space in the middle of their town to get there. And then it just all didn't seem very future-proof to us. So anyway, having looked at it, I've made a few notes, so it's right, look at my notes. We learned, there were lots of lessons we learned. After that experience, we all became either urban designers, community planners, or community architects. We didn't like the whole idea of using people as guinea pigs, which was what was going on at the time. People weren't asked what they wanted. They would just design these wonderful copies of Le Corbusier's work in France, and kind of pushed into it. And we didn't, in this country at the time, we were very broke. We didn't have any money for maintenance or very good supervision of spaces. So the lessons we learned was, first of all, don't treat people as guinea pigs. Secondly, don't reinvent the wheel. You know, high streets work really well. And Oxford Street, look at Oxford Street, still going strong. But in most towns, although they're having to adapt, high streets are still, they're still there, they're still viable. They may change the way they are, but they're also much more adaptable than this great big to us, a monstrosity. So the other thing is we don't build anything without having a good, healthy maintenance budget. Because now you, like you say, you look at the building now and it's appalling, you know, and a future plan, don't just build it for the day. So we kind of ended up with the idea that actually architecture was going off in the wrong direction. It needed to change. And I think it was a time of change. And what's really important at the moment is to apply the urban design principles and to any new settlement. I mean, we will always have to have new settlements, I guess, although I think we're still better off expanding the ones we've got. But I suppose I wanted to make those points, but I also wanted to ask all of you if, you know, if you're aware of urban design principles, things like corner shop size on the street, that might and is that in any way informing the work you're doing? I mean, what you're doing sounds fantastic, and the fact that you're involving people in it is really important. But could you answer that for me? Do you need us to tell you what the urban design principles are? I don't suppose you do.
That's such, oh my goodness, there's so much to say. I don't know where to start. I agree with a lot of what you said. I think I need to defend the planners and say that they planned the neighbourhoods with a corner shop, with a pub and with a community centre in each distinct area, like Kildrum, Seafar, Carbrae. They did have that. And there were aspirations to make sure that nobody had a road to cross, so that there were underpasses, which, you know, they were problematic. But the idea was that nobody had to cross the road. So it was supposed to be a safe town. They wanted the houses to have views of the countryside nestled into the hillside. So there was thought, and then there was an idea that each house in each person's living room had to have an hour of sunlight for at least 11 months of the year. So they were taking into account things like that. But yes, obviously there was not a maintenance budget, that it wasn't very well maintained. I did speak to people about community consultation, and I in one of the essays I've talked about a display at Cumbernauld Library where North Lanarkshire Council's got a proposed kind of vision and a model of what the new town centre might be like, and they are really they're talking that they're going to engage with the community, that they want to hear what the community says. If they don't get it right, then the people can hold them to account. So I think that's very much on their mind, that they want to get it right and they want people to be on board with them and bring them with them.
I think the building as well is only back in council hands. So North Lanarkshire Council have got the building back. So they blame all the kind of state of the building on the private developers who owned it. So they then feel that there's this obligation that they have to sort this out, and they have to sort it out, and they have to engage with people and stuff like that. So yeah, I think the other thing is, if we started looking at urban policy and started even pretending we knew anything about it, it would be a very different project. And that's not kind of what we do, because I think that world exists, but it's not very engaging for wider people. Not being in any way disrespectful, but we want to create something accessible that tells the story, that allows people to kind of know, because most people in West of Scotland just now think of Cumbernauld Town Centre is he an eyesore and now it's been demolished, and there's not even any other dialogue about that place, or it feels as if anyone's spoken to the residents. So I think we feel that this is an opportunity to do that, but from a very non-academic, non-architectural, non-textual, textual.
I think if I'll just come in and then, you know, bring it back. But yeah, I think, as Chris says, what we try and do is we do work with people with with that expertise. We are open to them, and we have, of course, spoken to many people with that kind of view. I think by osmosis, we pick up a lot of these principles ourselves and are aware of it. But our job is not to go and replan Cumbernauld. Our job is not to, in fact, even critique Cumbernauld in that sense. I think there's plenty of that. Certainly in this project, our job was to offer ways in for people to then do that. And I think that's what we try and do. I think in terms of the bigger issues there that you really eloquently bring out, Jill, there's kind of two things here going on. On one hand, you have the Cumbernauld itself and its specific concrete, if you'll excuse the pun, issues, right, that are there with that. That are very kind of specific and so forth. And then there's this broader question of how communities are included in architecture and consulted, and that asymmetry which is there. Certainly there when Cumbernauld was planned, right? No question. I mean, I think, as Alison said, go to Seaford and tell me you don't want to live there. I would challenge you, right? There's some really great design in that, which was patriarchally, you know, paternally imposed, but works, right? So there's some really good planning there, and then there's some stuff that just didn't work for various reasons. As you rightly say, maintenance budget is always the issue. It comes down to it. It's like whether it's Red Road Flats here or anywhere actually I've seen and worked in, the ability to maintain it is the key. And then there's that bigger question of, are people actually ever properly talked to about this? And I would say that a bit of devil's advocacy here. You go to the Antonine Centre, which replaced a lot of the old town centre, a classic mall, right, that is getting built everywhere and is kind of proposed as the replacement now. Tell me how many people were actually consulted on that. Tell me how much thought went into that, because it's failing. It's already kind of went into receivership more than once, and it doesn't work. So that I think, you know, yeah, modernism, brutalism becomes this natural scapegoat for that, and with some justice to that as well. But we're still doing it, and we're still doing it in so many ways as well across the board. That is very, I think, serious for the way our communities grow and develop and so forth. Anyway,
Thank you.
Thank you for those responses. Next we've got Rob Richardson, followed by Claire Hamilton, and then Paula. You put your hand up. If I can bring you in after Claire, okay? So Rob Richardson, over to you.
Thanks very much, Chris, Alison, and Mitch, for a really interesting set of presentations. I had a question relating to the new the proposed new series of new towns that the UK government has been talking about. I'm a lecturer in placemaking at the University of Manchester, and I've been following, like many others, the UK government's interest in developing new towns in the coming years. And lots of the debate has been focused around delivering housing numbers, finding the right locations, but there's been some quite promising conversations about design as well. I wanted to ask for your opinions from your experience of Cumbernauld and your experience working with people closely there. What lessons would you draw for anyone who wants to develop new towns now?
Well, John, who I interviewed, John Kirkhope, who's an architect, he said if he was to, in the first essay, he said if he was to advise anyone on building new towns now, he would tell them to keep the farms and the kind of small holdings and the buildings. He said they would make lovely local hubs. So I think the kind of buildings nearby. Yeah, that's all. I did have another thought, but it's just gone out of my head, so I'm going to hand over to, sorry, Rob, I'm going to hand over to my colleagues.
Will I go first, Chris, or you?
Yeah, you go. I thought you were away, Mitch. I was panicking because you always give a better answer.
Yeah, I mean, I think the way you take lessons is really risky and dangerous, and can be dangerous sometimes, you know, because you can look at Cumbernauld and see all these apparent caveats. I think the main thing, and Jill kind of touched upon this, is consultation, but what consultation that means something that has actual grit and also has a lifespan beyond just, some stuff going up in a library and people going, I like that, I don't, right? That's how consultation is generally done, right? And you'll see that anywhere, I think. There are some better techniques that are available, but they're not always availed of. Bob Davis, who we talked to, who's, wants to flatten this thing tomorrow, he's there to press the button, right? But he did say, look, what we need to look at are kind of more democratic structures around consultation, as in Ireland, for example, where they have kind of people assemblies, I think they're called, and structures that exist where people can not just feed in at the end where some architects have already kind of won a competition or want to win one, but actually from the beginning to the end and all the way through. And I think it's that kind of thinking where the people are active within not just the conception of a new town, but also the life of it. And there is that. It's always dangerous consulting people in a sense, and in that it's always like, what are you going to get from that? But I do think there are structures that are there that exist to allow it, and should be kind of built in to that process even before we're getting architects to do their nice glossy, pictures of what this thing could be. Anyway, Chris.
I've remembered what I was going to say. Sorry, Chris.
It's all
I think
right,
it's important. I didn't realise, I guess maybe I was a bit naive, but I didn't realise how much of new buildings and rely on corporate finance and bringing business and bringing money on board that isn't, so things aren't state funded anymore. This kind of utopian socialist ideal of building houses, building places, government funded, that's just, from what I've been learning, that's completely out the picture. So then that makes a lot of ifs and, oh, this could happen if, and we need to attract the interest of this, but if it doesn't happen, then it won't happen. So it's tricky. It's like a big jigsaw. I don't envy people designing new towns.
I don't think I've got anything to add on that question, because again, we're not very technical, if I'm honest. So I'll pass on to the next question, if that's okay.
Okay. Well, thank you for that. I think interesting the comment about the private sector funding. The Centre for Cities, they published a report earlier this week that calls for a major injection of public funds. And of course, the public sector can borrow money at substantially cheaper rates than the private sector. They're advocating a sort of split between a complementary role between public sector funding and delivery, private sector funding and delivery. So it'll be interesting to see whether that pans out or not. So next we've got Claire Hamilton. Can you pose?
Oh, yes, I think. Can you hear me?
There you go. Yeah.
Oh, hi everyone. Chris, Mitch, and Alison. Thanks so much for sharing your excellent work with us. So my question was, it's slightly related to what Alison was talking about around private investment, and given that one of the main purposes of the centre is around retail and shopping, I wondered if you got a sense from any retailers or businesses as to whether the environment was fit for purpose for them and what they needed in order to succeed and have sustainable businesses in the area. Thank you.
I can chat a little bit about that. I think retail's really tough in Cumbernauld Town Centre. There's not that many big major brands still there. Most of them pulled out. COVID gave it a real kicking as well. So there's a lot of kind of smaller independent traders there just now, and I think, I think it was in late September there was really high winds here in the west of Scotland, and it blew out some of the windows. So the whole town centre was closed for about 3 weeks, and that kind of killed a lot of businesses. But there's also the general trend of people think that, well, it's going to be demolished. So if you're a retailer or if you're a business owner, you kind of stay away from that site. You avoid it at all costs, because it just doesn't seem practical at all. And I think once the bigger brands pull out, that's when it's really difficult. I think the Royal Bank of Scotland, I think, is either just about to cease trading there, or it will do. We tried to speak to a few of the kind of independent traders as well. But we never got people. Some people are a little bit reluctant. I think if they had a business, they're more reluctant to kind of speak to us. But as I say, for us, the biggest story wasn't retail. It was about these community organisations using these former retail spaces. You know, we found that fascinating, and we found those stories the ones to kind of tell, and for us to then get access to. I mean, this place we were at, it's a former Virgin Bank. You know, the safe was still there, the tellers were there. The tellers were just full of cans of beans and cereal, and you were allowed to take 2 items, 3 items. The safe was where they stored all the food. You know, it was like, here we are, 21st century Britain. So we kind of get caught up on that. But just knowing and reading from local papers, and speaking to the town centre manager as well, you know, he would tell us what the problems were and what the retailers were facing. Yeah.
Thank you. And that's a particularly interesting question, isn't it? I mean, what's happening to retail and whether things will change. In Canterbury, in Kent, there's a shop that was built in, I think, between 1394 and 1396, which is still in use. It's part of the same block as Debenhams, which a couple of 14 and 15-year-old kids set fire to early in the week. So it was lucky to escape. But it does give some sort of reassurance that maybe retail aspects of retail, traditional, will be here to stay in the long term, as will be 14 and 15-year-old kids mucking around in shopping centres, sometimes with fire and sometimes without fire. Anyway, next, Paula Larkin. You've had your hand raised for a long time and been very patient.
Hiya. Thanks very much, Chris, Alison and Mitch. That was excellent. I was just wondering, you know, it focuses on the Cumbernauld Town Centre, which exists because of Cumbernauld. Is there any kind of plans to widen the project and make it about, you know, the whole of Cumbernauld? The other thing was, are you doing an exhibition of any kind? You know, I know you did your openings, which unfortunately I missed, but I just, you know, to be able to come into a space and like see the photographs on exhibition and see the dialectogram and maybe hear Alison read or hear the stories and see the films. I don't know if you've got any plans for that.
We would love to. There's not. I don't think. No, there's nothing sort of coming up. But that's a great idea, and we would love to. These things take funding, and as you sure you know, and time and partners and that kind of thing. So hopefully. And
Yeah.
yes, good point. Oh, sorry, go on. You go, Mitch.
Oh, yeah. I think in terms of exhibition, it certainly was thought about, but there were questions at the beginning in terms of where would that be and what would the right space be for that. And I think we're not saying no to that, but in terms of what we could get support for at the time, we thought the book was the best outcome because that then can go out and into other spaces and, you know, is portable and has that value. But the town centre story is not over. You know, we are only at the first, third year of it being officially under demolition order, and they're saying about 10 before we get anywhere to pushing any buttons in a kind of real sense. So I do think there'll be other opportunities for us to share this work. And in terms of expanding it, we certainly did look at Cumbernauld. I mean, I went to Our Ladies with Alison and fell in love with that building and wanted to draw it. It was a Titanic moment. I want to draw you. You know, so there's definitely material there for us to consider. I think at the moment we're certainly just glad we were able to kind of realize this and get to the end for now, and then start these conversations that we're having at the moment about what all this means and how we look at it. But I do have a feeling we're not done yet, because we had that feeling with Red Road as well. We did our initial projects and, you know, we kept going back and back and that kept on going. So I do feel we're not done yet, but for now, anyway, we've got something to share and talk about.
Yeah, I mean, Paul, just very quickly, Paul, it's all about funding, really, and you'll know that, Paul, how tough it is to get funding. And we were, funded from Creative Scotland and William Grant Foundation, and part of that is community engagement. Part of that is Scottish audience, international audience, and stuff. Exhibition just seemed a wee bit kind of grander, but I think the idea of working there long term, I would certainly love to be interested in it, but I think the people now in charge of like the North Lanarkshire Council, and then if we end up doing a project funded by them or any other organisation, then we don't have the creative freedom to produce what we want to produce. So these kind of, I'm not saying smaller scale because the book's a wonderful thing, but in some ways, bigger, longer projects involves somebody with another message that we couldn't really. It was the same story in Red Road, Paul. When we were working at Red Road, under the Glasgow House Association at the time, there was lots of artists in play. We were all being paid, a little bit of money to do things and do different projects. But there was ground rules, no mention of asbestos, no mention of treatment of asylum seekers. All of these things, there was a real strong marketing overarching kind of rules that we had to apply by. So, but we would love to continue doing it, definitely. And as Mitch said, we're a long way into this journey. Very early days just now.
Cheers. I mean, the only reason I'm asking that is because you didn't interview me, and I'm born there, I was born in my mother's bed in the tunnel room, 81 Craigieburn Road. I'm just wondering if there's anybody else.
Oh my goodness.
Is there anybody else online with us who was born or lived in Cumbernauld? Put your hand up. Or nearby.
Well, Chris or Mitch, I can't remember, was talking about Bob Davis, and he said what Cumbernauld become known by is its town centre. But he says people say, I think we've quoted that in the book, but people don't talk about the housing in the neighbourhood areas, the forests. So he was saying there is a difference. So there is a need, I think, to look at the kind of bigger story of Cumbernauld as well. And Paula, keep in touch. We will interview you, please.
Top of the list.
That's fantastic. We've got one last hand raised, and then we should probably call it to close. Fascinating that it's been. We've run 20 minutes over. Peter Mochachi, would you like to put your question?
Yeah, sure. Apologies, this will probably be a wee bit rambling because it just occurred to me, and I also got here a wee bit late. So, Chris, sorry I didn't get to catch your images, but just a bit of a mishmash of a sort of question observation about tense. Thinking about the focus of the work, and the kind of work that collectively as artists we often do, past tense, present tense, future tense. And with great respect for the idea of the project that you're working on together, and some of the individuals that I know better than others doing the work, I'm sure this comes to yourselves, that sometimes when the work feels that it's dealing with past tense, we kind of can touch on what can almost be what Darren McGarvey might call safari, poverty safari, or entropy safari at its kind of at its worst. I think there's still always an argument to say it's incredibly valuable to consolidate that past tense, but sometimes we worry a bit about that in our agency. So just particularly because of what you've said, Chris, I'd kind of make an appeal, or a kind of maybe a slight disagreement about your own agency in terms of the present tense and indeed the future tense of these kind of places. Because it strikes me that the kind of works that you're capable of doing together act as a kind of super connector for place. And in a way, we can slag off the new towns, but it's exactly the same for my street, or inner city towns across and cities across the world where we have high levels of alienation and disconnection for all sorts of reasons, economic, political, and all the rest. But the work that you're doing in the present tense acts as a kind of point of super connection for human beings. They come to it, they see themselves, they see things that you've photographed or written about or drawn in a new way, and it connects it together. And I think there's a really strong argument, notwithstanding what Chris said about, the compromise of being part of the system, that the idea of the town artist that went with the new towns, like David Harding and Glenrothes, is that you yourselves there, kind of David's appointment in Glenrothes was a lifetime appointment. He worked in the planning office and he was there. He only stayed 10 years eventually, but he moved his family there. He moved in and lived there. And I think that we have to make an argument that what you're doing is something really unique, that urbanists and planners and architects and others, social workers, they can't do the same thing. You make a connection to places through words and drawings and images and photographs that is a potential solution to our kind of high levels of alienation that we have everywhere, not just in the new town. So in other words, notwithstanding some of the questionable decisions in the design of parts of Cumbernauld, if there was that live, living project going on, people would see the same thing really quite differently. So I think my appeal would be to yourselves to say, not just in recording the past of these places, but in being active agents in the present, and to some extent, in the future as well, to trust your own knowledge, to work as you do politically and without compromise, but to demand that your own value in being seconded to these projects with the freedom that you'd stipulate, but in permanent posts, should you choose to do it. That's my jumbled thought about that. Sorry, it sort of came to me as as I was thinking about this project. So
I don't think you need to answer that. I think what Peter's done is really summed up, probably for all of us, how we feel about what you've done. It's not, you haven't just been recording the past. You've been recording the relationships that exist now, or the type of relationships that exist now within any new development that could exist. So it's really been fantastic. We've got loads of quotes, an old take on what modern was going to be. Never go back. That's where the trauma starts. Although I don't quite understand that one. Perhaps that chap had particularly bad experiences in his past. The importance of whatever is to come, that it shouldn't be an anywhere place, that it needs to be special. I think you've done a fantastic job there. And can I ask one question? Is there still time? How much time is there to visit Cumbernauld?
Years.
Yeah.
Yes. It's 2027, I think, or even further on. There's one building being demolished in January, but it's separate from, but that kicks off. But there's lots of time, to come and visit.
Well, maybe we might try organising a visit to Cumbernauld, and perhaps we could all of us meet together in the flesh, as it were.
Be lovely.
Yeah.
All right. Okay. Well, I don't think there are any more questions, and I know people have got to go back to work. Thank you so much, Chris, Alison, Mitch. It's been well, a tremendous eye-opener and true soul in what you've been telling us about today. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good luck.
Thank you.
And thank you, Peter. That was a wonderful summing up, I think.
Yeah, thank you.
Yes,